Everyone, and thank you, Lori, for organizing the panel and inviting us all to speak tonight. Over the past few years, I've had the opportunity to work at a few different free market think tanks that have really taken this issue of poverty head on, and so I won't be talking about policies specifically tonight, but rather just a few steps that I think both conservatives and libertarians can take to better position themselves in the poverty debate. So one of the trends that I've noticed over the past few years is that the message that the right has been sending to the public about poverty has been transforming. We've been moving from a message of just focused on individual freedom to one focused more around human flourishing. I think this is a very positive change. I'm excited where it's going. So the old message probably sounded something like this. If the government gets out of the way, the poor will have the right incentives to create better lives for themselves. And if they make the right choices, then they will prosper. But the new message that we're seeing today says something like this. We believe free enterprise is the best system to pull full nations out of poverty. And we want free enterprise because we want all of humanity to flourish. So notice how the first message sounds more anti-government and the second message is more pro-humanity. With this new emphasis on human flourishing, it raises the question, what is human flourishing exactly? It's a very broad term and it can be difficult to define, but many people believe that Aristotle was the first to coin the term, and he defines it as the pursuit of virtue and excellence. The founding fathers also carried this concept in the Declaration of Independence when they used the phrase life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Many theologians think that flourishing is tied to this idea of shalom in the Old Testament. Theologian Cornelius Plantinga defines shalom. He says, we call it peace, but it means far more than mere peace of mind or a ceasefire between enemies. Shalom means universal flourishing, wholeness, and delight, a rich state of affairs in which natural needs are satisfied and natural gifts are fruitfully employed. So I think this concept of humanity really speaks to the core, this concept of flourishing really speaks to the core of our humanity. And flourishing gives context and meaning to freedom. So it's this idea that freedom is only good if we do something good with it, and freedom is good because it allows more flourishing. And flourishing affects every area of life. So flourishing it's a world where scarce resources are properly stewarded to create prosperity. It's a world where every individual has the opportunity to pursue and fulfill their individual calling in life. Flourishing means stronger families, better schools, better hospitals. Flourishing means humanity reaching its fullest potential. So that's what this idea of flourishing is all about. So I think this idea of flourishing is definitely driven by the think tanks, more so than the politicians in Washington. And they use the term well-being and happiness sort of interchangeably with flourishing, but I'll give some examples. The Acton Institute, they recently released a documentary, the Poverty Here documentary, which explores the relationship between free enterprise and poverty and human flourishing across the globe. The Cato Institute recently launched humanprogress.org, which is a great resource with data, charts, and maps showing improvements of human well-being over time. The Charles Koch Institute's Well-Being Initiative was recently established to advance understanding of what it means for humanity to flourish. And we also explore this principle a lot at the Institute for Faith, Work, and Economics, where I work. But I think the one leader in Washington that's really leading the charge in this is Arthur Brooks of the American Enterprise Institute. And he makes the point to always talk about free enterprise in the context of morality and happiness. So what's important about the way Arthur Brooks talks about poverty and the relationship between free enterprise and poverty is that he makes it a point to fight for people rather than fighting against the government. He recently told the Huffington Post, my movement shouldn't be fighting against things. My movement should be fighting for people. And I think he makes a really good point there. He also makes it a point to focus on morality and not just the results of free enterprise. So it's this idea that free enterprise is the right thing to pursue because it respects the dignity of the human person, not just because it can get X amount of people off of food stamps. He also makes the clarification that I think it's easy to confuse, but he clarifies that freedom is just the means, and flourishing is the actual end that we want to reach. So in other words, freedom isn't a virtue in and of itself, it's just a prerequisite, and freedom is only good if we do something good with it. So I think this new style of messaging that we're seeing in Washington right now is very hopeful and empowering, and I think it better positions the right in the poverty debate. But even with this positive change in messaging, I think both libertarians and conservative circles in DC have failed to walk the walk, so to speak, or at least they failed to create that public perception. I remember last year when I was writing a blog post on poverty, and I was talking about why churches and private charities can better care for the poor than government programs. And when I finished it, I felt kind of like a hypocrite, because here I was telling everyone that to be involved with something that I wasn't personally involved with. So that's when I realized that if we really want the government to step out, that means we have to step in. So what I did was I started volunteering and mentoring inner city high school girls up in Northeast DC, and this really opened my eyes to the complexity of poverty, and it was a really humbling experience because it made me realize how little I really knew about poverty. So as a movement, I think we can do a better job emphasizing participation in the solutions and really work to embed this in our culture so that when people think about conservatives and libertarians, they don't even question whether or not we care about the poor. So if the right keeps human dignity at the center of the conversation in word and in deed, I think this puts the left at a huge disadvantage, because the government is just incapable of addressing the needs of the whole person. So housing, healthcare, and food stamps are temporary material answers, but people are not purely material beings and with purely material needs. They also have social and spiritual needs. And this is why voluntary charity that embraces solidarity and subsidiarity is so important when it comes to helping the poor. As de Tocqueville said, only voluntary charity establishes that bond, or as he calls it, a moral tie between the giver and the receiver, so that the giver is free to experience cheerful giving rather than forced taking, and the receiver is free to experience gratitude and humility rather than entitlement. So to summarize, I think there are two things the right can do to better position itself in the poverty debate before they even start talking about policy, and that's give freedom context by emphasizing human dignity and flourishing, and also to shift the focus of the problems that government is creating to talking about and participating in the solutions. And I think once they do this, they'll really show the American public that we can love the poor in a way that the government will never be able to. Thank you.
Thanks, Elise. So next we're going to go to Brandon. Brandon actually has a lot of good experience on the